It's not often that an investigation into a corruption scandal becomes a scandal in and of itself, but that is exactly what is unfolding in Brazil. Last month, an online news outlet, the Intercept Brasil, began publishing a series of exposés about the wheeling and dealing of the Minister of Justice, Sergio Moro. In a previous life, Moro was a judge in charge of Operation Car Wash, an investigation into the biggest case of political corruption in the country's history. It resulted in the arrests of hundreds of politicians and business figures, hastened the fall of one president, and landed another former president behind bars. Moro's work on that case and his depiction in the Brazilian news media as an anti-corruption crusader helped get him the job of Minister of Justice, appointed by President Jair Bolsonaro. Now, the news outlets that helped create Moro are having some serious second thoughts, and the journalists at The Intercept who broke this latest Moro story are starting to feel the heat from the Brazilian authorities. Our starting point this week is Rio de Janeiro. The cast of characters in this case of corruption is long, the terminology confusing, but the story is simple. Back in 2014, the judge appointed to preside over the Operation Car Wash investigation, the case Brazilians call Lava Jato, was Sergio Moro. The probe uncovered money laundering, bribery, and corruption at the state-owned energy company Petrobras. Several members of the ruling PT party under leftist President Dilma Rousseff were jailed for their part in the scheme. Moro was cheered on, lionized by Brazil's mostly right-wing media. TV channels like Globo and Record, magazines like Veja. He was seen as a future president. Now he is fighting for his political life because of an investigation into his investigation, known as Vaza Jato, and a series of text messages between him and prosecutors that strongly suggest that, legally speaking, the fix was in.
The most important revelation is that Sergio Moro was in cahoots with the prosecution. It's entirely forbidden to have a judge who is in constant conversation with the prosecution in order to arrange outcomes.
The media didn't create Moro the superhero, it just gave him visibility, put a flashlight on a judge who was indeed doing a rather heroic job by Brazilian standards. However, Sergio Moro did have a party ideology, and he was manipulating the investigations rather than taking a step back and being impartial, which is what we expect of a judge.
Brazil found itself in a historic moment where it could clean itself up. And the media really bought into the image that Moro himself was constructing. They absorbed it. They deliberately boarded this ship because strategically it was good to join the right side, the side of the people fighting corruption.
Sergio Moro's reputation as an anti-corruption crusader, scrubbing Brazil clean of graft, was demolished by The Intercept. Its secret Brazil archive includes leaked texts sent over the Telegram messaging app between Moro and prosecutors investigating the car wash case. The messages are explosive and potentially game-changing. They clearly show a judge legally required to be neutral, working with prosecutors, in some cases advising them on how to present various legal cases to him. They also appear to confirm the suspicion that throughout the car wash investigation, Moro and the prosecution were trying to manipulate press coverage to turn it against members of the PT party. Moro's work engulfed the government of President Dilma Rousseff, hastened her downfall, and led to the jailing of Lula Da Silva, her party colleague who pollsters considered the favorite to win the next presidential election. With Lula behind bars, legally prevented from running, a path was cleared for right-wing populist Jair Bolsonaro. He won last year's election. Bolsonaro then made Moro his Minister of Justice, which in light of all that collusion in the car wash case was the least he could do.
What this whole Lava Jato campaign, as a media campaign, produced was a devaluation of institutional politics, of party politics in Brazil, to a degree in which the electorate became so skeptical that in the end they elected extreme right-wing outsider Bolsonaro. So Bolsonaro and his election should be seen as a product of this long campaign against institutional politics.
Having contributed to the rise of an anti-politics, anti-establishment rhetoric that in the end did not just criminalize the left, but started to criminalize the whole of the political system and started to also weaken the legislative and the Congress powers, basically saying that we need someone from outside of politics to take this. So it very much paved the way for the rise of the right, the extreme right, and for Bolsonaro specifically. So it has had not just political implications, it's had political, economic, and social.
Brazil's media system hasn't fared much better. The most powerful broadcaster in the country is Globo. It has a history of supporting right-wing governments, even the military dictatorship from 1964 to 85.
2015 ficou marcado pela Operação Lava Jato.
Globo went all in on the car wash story, which was justified to an extent by the scale of the corruption. But the partisan tone of much of Globo's coverage rang alarm bells. Globo's coverage of the Vaza Jato leaks has been more selective and less exuberant. Veja is Brazil's best-selling news magazine, a right-wing publication that was pro-Moro and has now swung the other way, partnering with the Intercept on the leaks. Veja's change of tack followed a change in ownership.
The media in Brazil is mostly private, and they all belong to traditional families, right? Powerful families. And on top of that, they are all conservative. Veja belonged to one of these traditional families. So until recently, Veja was some sort of Fox News in print, vitriolic journalism, right? They went bankrupt and they sold Veja to a businessman. And this guy apparently wants to give the news magazine a different orientation, editorial orientation. So I think that's the main reason that Veja is now collaborating with the Intercept.
The reaction of the media was incredible. Lots of international outlets followed up on our reporting with articles of their own. But others, such as the Globo Group, made a point, especially in the first few days, to emphasize the perspective of the Justice Ministry and of Sergio Moro himself.
Na semana passada, o ministro da Justiça, Sergio Moro, denunciou ter sido vítima de crime. O celular dele foi invadido por meio do aplicativo de mensagens Telegram.
It presented all the possible things that could be wrong in our revelations. In Brazil, there exists a section of right-wing media that invested a lot in the car wash story, and there is no way they will ever let go of that narrative.
We wrote to Globo and to Veja with questions on their approach to the Vaza Jato leaks. Veja declined to comment on its editorial about-face. Globo wrote back with a detailed defense of its coverage, especially the significant amount of airtime it has devoted to the legality of the journalism. This past Wednesday, a judge ordered the arrest of 4 people on charges of hacking Sergio Moro's phone. The 4 are accused of being the sources of the material. As Globo put it, it would be considered bad journalism in any part of the world, including in Qatar, to ignore that the cell phones of the authorities were hacked. Even though, back in March of 2016, when Moro released a tape of a private phone call between Dilma Rousseff and Lula Da Silva, Globo was less concerned about the journalistic ethics. It ran with that story, as did Veja and so many other Brazilian news outlets.
In a story of such magnitude as Vaza Jato, which involves the hacking of several authorities, including the most famous judge in Brazil, the current Minister of Justice, the biggest news, I believe, is not the content of the alleged conversations, but rather the hacking of these conversations. This is very serious.
Well, much more serious was when Moro leaked a conversation between presidents. This was not in the public interest. Moro had the chance of a lifetime to go down in history as someone who has combated corruption. You had all the power at your disposal, all the media attention, all the public support. And no, instead of that, you chose a political project. You chose to align yourself to a particular group
Sergio Moro can complain all he wants about the latest leaks and the news coverage he now receives. But having done what he did, leaking information and manipulating the media, ostensibly in the name of justice, and been exposed by an act of journalism, he is no longer in a position to judge.